My name is Anita Raj, and today I am bringing you a new anatomy and physiology video. As many of you have known, I'm taking over the cardiovascular system from AJ because this is what I studied when both of us were competing in the local science Olympiad competition. My first video was an overview of the system, and I showed you a diagram so we cleared up any misconceptions you might have about the cardiovascular system. My second video was the first part of looking at heart anatomy. We were looking at the external factors around the heart, as in where the heart was located in the body, and the surrounding organs, structures, major bones, and thus things like that. The last video I shot, the third video on the cardiovascular system, it was all about the heart itself. So we looked at the heart, we looked at a cross-section of the heart, we looked inside of the heart, at the chambers, at the cavities, at the veins, the aorta, the vena cava, all those things that are pertaining to the heart. So we looked specifically at the heart in the last video. So today, what I have prepared for you are 3 diagrams of the heart. We're going to be looking at a posterior view of the heart. We're going to be looking at a anterior view of the heart, and we're going to be looking at gross anatomy of the heart, so like the inside of the heart. And these are all very important diagrams, so you'll understand where all these structures I'm talking about are located relative to the outside part of the heart, the inside part of the heart, the front of the heart, the side of the heart, the back of the heart. Whenever I refer to a certain position, you should be able to point out where those important structures are. So that's what we're going to be going over today. So we're going to be leaving the notes that I usually have up on the screen, and all you're going to see on the screen is a diagram, and we're going to be walking through it together. It's a labeled diagram, so you won't have to worry about not knowing any of the structures. You just have to follow along as I talk. And you get a visual of the system. You get a better visual of the heart and what it looks like at different angles. Before I even get into the video, I have 3 main things I want to let you know about. The first is that we would really appreciate if you paused the video and liked it, and you subscribe to our channel so you could join our expanding student community. Also, you should hit the post notification bell so you're notified of all of our latest posts, so you can just jump right into YouTube and watch them as soon as they go up. You can also share our videos using our socials, our Facebook, our Twitter, and our Instagram. Please utilize them to spread the word about eCoreAcademy to family and friends. And lastly, if you have any comments, as in positive remarks, suggestions, and so forth, you can drop a comment below, or you can email us. Our email address will be in the description box below. All right, let's get right into the video I have planned for us today. Okay, so we are going to be first looking at the external heart. So we're going to be looking at the anterior view. If you remember some of the medical terminology we were talking about together, anterior means in front of. So this is the front of the heart. We're going to be looking at, it went to the next slide. Okay, here's the anterior view of the heart. Sorry, it went to the next slide. So this is the external heart. So we're going to be looking at the outside of the heart. We're not going to be looking inside of the heart like we did yesterday. We're going to be looking at the outside of the heart. And we're going to be looking at the anterior view, so the front of the heart. Okay, so let's go over all of these labeled structures right here. Just so you know, I struggled with the arteries and the veins that pertain to the heart itself. So although there are many veins and arteries connected to the heart, that the heart utilizes these vessels to transport blood throughout the body into the lungs, the heart has its own arteries and veins because the heart itself needs blood because it is a muscular organ, and muscles need blood, and it needs its own blood flow. It's okay if you can't memorize these arteries and veins. I'll be going through them, but if you can just take notes, that'd be very useful for you. Also, because these diagrams have labels on them, I would suggest you view it on a larger device, as in a laptop or an iPad. If you have a phone, I'll be going over these structures. I have a cursor here, but you're going to be struggling a little bit, so that's why I recommend a larger viewing device, but it's not impossible if you're viewing it on a phone. Okay, let's get into the external heart. Let's look at the anterior, as in the front view. If you look at this picture, it does look like the front of the heart. So you should be able to tell just by looking at the picture that it is the anterior view of the heart. So the first structure is called the Brachiocephalic Artery. It's this right here. So the Brachiocephalic Artery is an artery. It's part of the mediastinum. Remember, the heart is located in the mediastinum, the central cavity of the chest, and it supplies blood to the right arm, head, and neck. So this here is the aorta. The aorta gets freshly oxygenated blood from your left ventricle. This is just a review. And then you have these three main arteries branching off of the aortic arch. This one, the Brachiocephalic Artery, it mainly focuses on delivering blood to your right arm, your head, and your neck. Let's look at the superior vena cava. Remember when we were talking about it the other day? It is one of the great vessels. It is a vein. It brings all the veins that come from the top part of your body, so all the all the veins above your heart, they all combine into the superior vena cava, and this structure brings deoxygenated blood into the right atrium from the top parts of your body. Here we have the right pulmonary artery, which is right here. It branches off of the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk is connected to your right ventricle. Your right ventricle gets that deoxygenated blood from your right atrium, pushes it into the pulmonary trunk, and the pulmonary trunk will push that blood, half that blood, to the right pulmonary artery. This is the only case where you see an artery transporting deoxygenated blood, but we call it an artery because it's taking blood away from the heart. So it takes blood away from the heart, and this artery will lead to the lungs. The lungs will get rid of the carbon dioxide in your blood and refuel your red blood cells with oxygen to take throughout your body. Here you have the ascending aorta. So your ascending aorta is pretty much the part of your aorta where it starts to get thicker. So it starts it's this thinner looking artery down here, but as it ascends, it's getting thicker and larger, and it becomes this gigantic arching structure. And it also increases in height, which means it's just going upward in this arch. That's why we call it the ascending aorta. Then you have the pulmonary trunk. So pulmonary trunk is right here. It is attached to the pulmonary valve. The pulmonary valve opens up to the right ventricle, and the right ventricle again will push the deoxygenated blood through your pulmonary valve into your pulmonary trunk and then to your pulmonary arteries. Here are the right pulmonary veins right over here. They're you can't really see them well in this picture, but in the posterior view you'll be able to see them better. These are veins, and they bring oxygenated blood back from the lungs and to your left atrium. Here you have the right atrium. It is the first cavity or chamber of the heart that blood enters. It collects deoxygenated blood from your vena cava. Here we have the right coronary artery. Let's go over first what the right coronary artery is. It is one of the two main vessels that supply the myocardium. Remember, the myocardium is that muscular part of your heart wall that has the conducting system of the heart that we went over yesterday. And it originates from the right aortic sinus of the ascending aorta, so over here, and runs into the right atrioventricular grove, which is also known as your coronary sulcus. And then it wraps around the right side of your heart, and it supplies the right atrium and the ventricles in the sinoatrial node, which is your SA node, which is part of your conducting system of the heart, which we'll be going over later, and also your atrioventricular, which is your AV node. And it branches off into the right posterior descending artery and the acute marginal artery. So that is your right coronary artery. So it says in the atrioventricular grove. So this is the line, this atrioventricular grove is right here. It's the line that demarcates where the borders of the underlying atria and ventricles are. What do I mean by this? So the atria is right here inside of the heart. This is the outside view of it, and the ventricle is down here inside of the heart. This line pretty much is atrioventricular growth. It shows that this is where the atria is, and this is where the atria stops, and this is where the ventricle starts. So that's what the atrioventricular growth is. And whenever I say coronary, I'm relating to the arteries that surround and supply the heart. So coronary arteries are specifically the arteries that that supply oxygenated blood to the heart. So the heart itself, which is an organ and needs blood, can keep pumping. Then you have the anterior cardiac vein. It is a group of parallel coronary veins that run over the anterior surface of the right ventricle before draining into the right atrium. And next, let's look at the marginal artery, which is right over here. It is a branch of the right coronary artery, and it helps supply blood to the septum. The septum is the middle part of the heart that divides the atrium and the ventricles. We'll see that in the gross anatomy of the heart. You'll get a better view of that. It's the middle of the heart. The marginal artery also supplies blood to your myocardium and your right ventricle. Now we have your right ventricle. Remember, right ventricle gets deoxygenated blood from your right atrium, pushes that blood through the pulmonary valve up your pulmonary trunk and through your pulmonary arteries so that that blood can go get oxygen in your lungs. Then you have the small cardiac vein. So the small cardiac vein runs in the coronary sulcus between the right atrium and ventricle and opens into the right extremity of the coronary sinus. It receives blood from the posterior part of the right atrium and ventricle, which means the back part of the atrium and the ventricle, and it may drain to the coronary sinus or to the right atrium or the middle cardiac vein. Next, we have the inferior vena cava. It's right down here. Remember, it is just like the superior vena cava. It is a great vessel and it's a great vein. All the veins from your lower part of your body that carry deoxygenated blood from your abdomen and your legs will all combine into your inferior vena cava, and all that deoxygenated blood will be transported up into your right atrium, and thus they will go through this whole cycle to get oxygenated and go back out into the body. Now let's come over to this side of labels. You have your left common carotid artery. As you can see, it's one of the three arteries that branch off of the arching aorta. So what is this carotid artery? Well, it branches up directly from the aortic arch. It's this middle artery right here, and it branches straight up from the aorta. It ascends up your neck, so it comes up your neck, and it is lateral to the trachea and the esophagus. So your trachea and esophagus are in your neck. It's just lateral to that, so it comes up right next to those. And it does not branch off in the neck. So it's just a single artery that just keeps going upward, 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 up your neck, along with your esophagus and trachea. Here you have the third artery on your aorta, and it's your left subclavian artery. So this guy is responsible for supplying blood to your right arm and is the auxiliary artery at the lateral border of the first rib. So what do I mean by this? So your axilla is actually the space right below your shoulder. So it's like your armpit area. So we call veins and arteries here auxiliary veins and arteries. So it is called an auxiliary artery, and it is right along your armpit and your first rib. Okay, so let's look at the next word we have. So aortic arch. It's this arch right here of the aorta. Like I said, the aorta is an arching structure, pardon me. It's like a bridge almost. So it's just the arch of the aorta from which these three arteries arise. Then you have the ligamentum arteriosum. So the ligamentum arteriosum is a ligament. It's right here. I don't know if you guys can see this well, but it's like this little white part right here. It is a ligament that holds the aorta and the pulmonary trunk and arteries together. And it's the remnant of a structure that forms within 3 weeks of birth. So it holds your aorta when your heart is pumping very aggressively. It holds your aorta and your pulmonary trunk together so that they don't split apart. It just keeps these two large vessels together. And it is pretty much the remnant of a structure that we all get after 3 weeks of birth. It's just the remnant of that, and it just keeps those two parts of your heart together. Then you have the left pulmonary artery. It serves the same purpose as the right pulmonary artery, collects deoxygenated blood that went through the right ventricle, up your pulmonary valve, up your pulmonary trunk, and then divided into these two arteries. So your left pulmonary artery will take that blood to your lungs so that it drops off carbon dioxide, picks up oxygen, and then will come back through these left pulmonary veins. So let's get right into the left pulmonary veins. Same thing as your right pulmonary veins. They collect oxygenated blood that is in your lungs, and they return it to the heart and to your left atrium. Now we have the left atrium itself. Your left atrium will collect freshly oxygenated blood that is returning to the heart through the pulmonary veins, and your left atrium will push that oxygenated blood through your mitral, as in your bicuspid valve, which is around here, and into your left ventricle. Then you have the auricle. This structure is located on the atria. So it's this pinkish reddish looking structure right here that my cursor is going over, and it's right over here above the left atrium. It has thin walls, and it acts as receiving rooms for blood. So just muscular pouches. So these guys just cover your atria, and they're just muscular receiving pouches for blood. Then you have this, and these are located on the external heart. So you would see this when you're looking outside of the heart, right on top of your atria. Then you got your circumflex artery. It branches off of the left coronary artery and supplies most of the left atrium. So it provides oxygenated blood to your left atrium. Then you got the left coronary artery. Again, it's in that left atrioventricular groove. So this groove, again, is between your left atrium and your left ventricle on the external part of your heart. And your left coronary artery, it arises from the left aortic sinus of the ascending aorta, which is over here. It lies mainly between the pulmonary trunk and the arcle of the left atrium, and it supplies blood to the left side of the heart muscle, so mainly your left atrium and your left ventricle. Then you have your left ventricle down here. It receives oxygenated blood through the mitral valve from your left atrium and pushes that oxygenated blood through the aortic valve into your aorta and then throughout your body. It's the largest and strongest chamber of your heart. Then you have the great cardiac vein. It's right over here, this bluish structure here. It is the largest of the veins draining into the coronary sinus from the myocardium. Remember what the myocardium is? And it collects deoxygenated blood from the anterior surfaces of the left ventricle. So the front surfaces of the left ventricle, so right here, this would be your left ventricle. This vein just collects deoxygenated blood from that area. Unless you just have the apex of the heart, this would just be like the bottommost part of the heart that would be against your diaphragm. So this is the very bottom. This is the apex. This is what we call the apex of the heart. Okay, so let's go to our next slide. So we're doing another external view of the heart, which is the outside view of the heart. But this time we're looking at the posterior view. Posterior means behind. So before, in this picture, we were looking at the anterior as in front view. Now we'll be looking at the posterior as in back view. And as you can see, it looks a little bit different. We see all these tube little holes and things like this that we might not understand. So let's go over what these things are. This structure right here is your aorta. Remember, our three arteries are carotid, subclavian, and our brachiocephalic artery. This should be a familiar structure to you because it's large, arching. This is the aorta. Now you have the left pulmonary artery. So now you'll be able to see the arteries and the veins that we were talking about the other day very well from the posterior view. This is your left pulmonary artery. Remember, it's the artery that branches off of the pulmonary trunk and it takes deoxygenated blood to your lungs so they can get oxygen. Then you have your left pulmonary veins right over here. They're in pink, while these arteries were in a bluish color. They're like in this pinkish, reddish, purplish color. They bring freshly oxygenated blood from your lungs and back to your heart, and these will connect to your left atrium. Then you have the auricle right here. Remember, it's that muscular pouch for blood that's right on top of your atria on the external view of the heart. And you have your left atrium right here. Remember, it's the chamber of the heart, third chamber of the heart that blood will come into contact with. It collects freshly oxygenated blood that's returning through your pulmonary veins. You have your great cardiac vein over here. We already talked about it. It's the largest of the veins draining into the coronary sinus from the myocardium. It collects deoxygenated blood from the anterior surfaces of the left ventricle. So it's right over here. This is your great cardiac vein. It just loops around from the front of the heart, from the front of the left ventricle, and then it comes over here. Then you have the posterior vein of the left ventricle. So this vein courses over the inferior wall of the left ventricle. So left ventricle is over here, and it drains into the coronary sinus. It's left of where the middle cardiac vein drains to the sinus. It's left of the middle cardiac vein. Then you have your left ventricle, which is right over here. Remember, it's the last chamber of the heart, the largest and most powerful chamber of the heart that pushes blood through your aortic valve into your aorta and throughout your body. Next, you have the apex that I just talked about, the very bottom of your heart. Right here, we call it the apex. Now we have the superior vena cava. This is just the back view of it. Again, it's that large, great vessel, great vein that all the veins from the top of your body combine into, and it brings deoxygenated blood into your right atrium, so the whole cycle of oxidation can occur. Then you have your right pulmonary artery right over here. Remember, this was the left one. Well, this is the right one. They both branch off of the pulmonary trunk, which you see in the anterior view, and they take that deoxygenated blood away from the heart into the lungs so that the blood can get oxygen. Next, you have your right pulmonary veins, same thing as your left pulmonary veins, bring oxygenated blood back from the lungs and into the heart. These guys join into your left atrium, and then this blood will eventually make its way out of the body. Then you have your right atrium, which is right over here underneath this auricle, and this is the first chamber of your heart that blood comes into contact with. It collects deoxygenated blood from your vena cava, and then it just pushes that into your right ventricle through the tricuspid valve, and then the blood will just follow the normal course it usually does. Then you have your inferior vena cava. Remember, we have a superior one that collects deoxygenated blood from veins that are coming from the top parts of your body, from the upper parts of your body. This one collects deoxygenated blood from veins coming from the bottom parts of your body, and this also empties out into the right atrium. This right here is the right coronary artery. It's located in the right atrioventricular groove. So this groove is again right between the right atrium and the right ventricle on the external part of the heart. It branches off of the right coronary artery. It branches off of the right coronary artery, and it supplies blood to your diaphragmatic surface of the myocardium. The right coronary artery is So this right here is your coronary sinus. So your coronary sinus is a collection of veins joined together to form a large vessel that collects blood from the heart muscle, which is called your myocardium, and delivers less oxygenated blood to the right atrium, as do the superior and inferior vena cava. So your coronary sinus will collect all the deoxygenated blood that the veins of your heart have collected from your heart, and your coronary sinus will then send that blood to your right atrium along with your vena cava, and then that deoxygenated blood that your heart gave back to the coronary sinus will go through the same cycle that blood from all over your body would go through to get oxygen. Then we have the posterior interventricular artery. It's in the posterior interventricular sulcus. So this is what I was talking about before. I mixed it up with the right coronary artery. I'm so sorry about that. I'm just going to reread what it is. It's a branch of the right coronary artery, so it branches. So this one branches off of your right coronary artery, because if you see right here, it just branches off and it just goes downward. It supplies blood to the diaphragmatic surface of the myocardium. So what do we mean by this? Well, we're talking about like the apex area. So if you're thinking about it, the apex, if you remember from location of the heart, the apex of the heart is very close to your diaphragm. So this is called the diaphragmatic part of your heart because it's closest to the diaphragm in your body. So this artery supplies blood to this part of your heart. Next, we have the middle cardiac vein. It is a vessel located on the posterior aspect of the heart, so the back of the heart. It arises at the cardiac apex, which is around here, and runs within the posterior interventricular groove. So interventricular groove means the groove between your ventricles. And it ends by draining into the right atrium via the coronary sinus. So this runs between your ventricles. This one right here. It runs between your ventricles, this vein right here, and it'll drain all that deoxygenated blood into the coronary sinus, which then takes the deoxygenated blood to your right atrium. And lastly, we have the right ventricle, which, as you all know, is just connected to your right atrium. It gets the deoxygenated blood from your right atrium and sends that deoxygenated blood to the lungs through multiple vessels that we talked about before, so that blood can get oxygen. Okay, now that we're done with this diagram, let's look at the final diagram I have for all of you. It is the gross anatomy of the heart. It's the frontal section. So we're looking at the front of the heart, but it's almost like we cut the heart in half and we're looking at the inside of it. So now we're looking at the inside of it. Many of you may be familiar because this is the kind of diagram I usually use, but this one is more realistically depicted with more realistic features like shading, depressions in the heart, actual heart muscles, and so forth. So let's look at them. You have the superior vena cava up here. Remember, it's the vein that collects all the deoxygenated blood coming from multiple veins from the top parts of your body. You have your right pulmonary artery right over here. It takes that deoxygenated blood coming from the pulmonary trunk into the lungs. You have your pulmonary trunk here. It takes the deoxygenated blood from your right ventricle through your pulmonary artery and into itself. You have your right atrium here. It's the first chamber of the heart that deoxygenated blood comes into contact with. The vena cava and the coronary sinus both empty into your right atrium. Then you have your right pulmonary veins here. So these bring oxygenated blood, newly oxygenated blood that was in the lungs back to the heart, and these connect into your left atrium. Then you have your fossa ovalis. So this is a depression. So just so you know where it is, it's this right here. It's like the shaded depression. So it means like an indent in the actual heart muscle. So it is a depression in the right atrium of the heart at the level of the interatrial septum. So right here between the two atria, it's a septum, which is like a wall. It's the middle. It is the remnant of a thin fibrous sheet that covered the foramen ovale during fetal development. So it's just a remnant of something we had when we were all fetuses. Now we have the pectinate muscles, which are right here. So they're like these bumps right here, if you guys see my cursor. They're teeth of a comb. So if you think of it, if you see a comb, it's almost like this. So they're shaped almost like that. The teeth of the comb shaped they're parallel to each other, parallel muscular columns. If you see, they kind of jut outward like a column. They're present on the inner wall of the right and left atrium. They're not located in the ventricles. And they're useful in increasing the power of contraction without increasing heart mass substantially. So what this means is that they help your heart get more power in its push, and your heart doesn't need to be too big to achieve that. These muscles help a small heart, even a small heart, be able to properly pump blood through itself. Then you have the tricuspid valve, which we talked about before. It's special because it is a 3-flapped valve. And remember, valves are important because they make sure that blood does not go in the wrong direction, so that it doesn't go backward from the ventricles to the atria. So the tricuspid valve is specially located between your right atrium and your right ventricle. Your right ventricle is right down here. It receives the deoxygenated blood from your right atrium and then pushes that blood upward this way through your pulmonary valve and into your lungs so that it can get oxygen, so your blood can get oxygen. Then you have the Chordae Tendineae, and these are located right here. They're like these elasticy looking things right here. They're almost like tendons, like cordy tendons. Think of it that way. Cords are very thin and tendons are stretchy structures. So these are your Chordae Tendineae. They're thin, strong, inelastic, fibrous cords that extend from the free edge of the cusps of the atrioventricular valves. These atrioventricular valves, again, are the valves between your atria and your ventricles. So your tricuspid valve over here and your mitral valve over here. And they do it to the pieces of the papillary muscles within the right and left ventricles, respectively. And they play a vital role in holding the atrioventricular valves in place while the heart is pumping blood. So these help the valves actually move. They pull the valves and they shut the valves so that the valves don't reopen when when one chamber of the heart is trying to push the blood to the next location. Then you have the trabeculate carneae. So these are rounded, or they're right here. They are rounded or irregular muscle columns which project from the inner surface of the right and left ventricle of the heart. So they're very similar to your pectinate muscles. So they're right here. They're almost like that for your ventricles. Then you have your inferior vena cava. So it's just opposite to the superior vena cava. Gets all the deoxygenated blood returning from the bottom parts of your body and pushes it into the right atrium. You have your aorta, which is the branching structure that comes off of your left ventricle, and then it splits into 3 different arteries: your brachiocephalic, your subclavian, and your carotid arteries, and just carries that oxygenated blood throughout your body. Then you have your left pulmonary artery, takes blood from your right ventricle into your lungs, deoxygenated blood. Then you have your left atrium, collects freshly oxygenated blood from your left pulmonary arteries and your left pulmonary veins and right pulmonary veins returning from the lungs. Then you have your mitral or bicuspid valve, which is also an atrioventricular valve, meaning it's located between an atrium and a ventricle. And it's bicuspid because it has 2 flaps, unlike 3 flaps over here. You can actually see the 3 flaps of the tricuspid valve, and then the 2 flaps of the bicuspid or mitral valve. And then this freshly oxygenated blood is forced through this valve and into your right into your left ventricle. You have your aortic semilunar valves. So semilunar valves are pretty much the valves we call the pulmonary valves, and then the pulmonary valve, and then your aortic valve. So aortic semilunar valve, and then pulmonary semilunar valve. So these are the atrioventricular valves right here, your tricuspid and your mitral valves. Then these are your semilunar valves right here, which are your pulmonary valve and your aortic valve. So your aortic valve will take blood from your left ventricle to your aorta to go throughout your body, whereas your pulmonary valve will take deoxygenated blood from your right ventricle and into your pulmonary trunk to take throughout your body. Then you have your left ventricle, the largest and strongest chamber of your heart, that receives freshly oxygenated blood from your left atrium and pushes that blood throughout your body using the aorta and the aortic valve. Then you have the papillary muscle right here. The papillary muscle is located in the ventricles of the heart. It works in tandem with this trabeculae carneae, and it is located in the ventricles of the heart. It attaches to the cusps of the atrioventricular valves, also known as the mitral and tricuspid valve, as we already said, and it's via the Chordae Tendineae and contracts to prevent inversion or prolapse of these valves on systole. So systole is just another word we use to describe ventricular contraction. It's when your ventricles contract and push blood, because your ventricles contract in tandem. So these serve the very similar purpose. These help to close the valves and open the valves accordingly, so there's no wrong flow of blood during contraction. Then you have the interventricular septum. It is a stout wall separating the ventricles, which are the lower chambers of the heart, from one another. So it's just this middle, it's just a wall of cells. It's part of your myocardium area, and it's just a thick wall that separates your two ventricles from each other, because these ventricles are very large, so this wall just separates them from each other. Then you have the myocardium. Remember, it is the third layer of your heart. You have the pericardium, epicardium, myocardium, and then endocardium. So this is a very thick layer of muscle. Remember, it provides structure for heart muscle. It also has the conducting system of the heart. It helps the heart in contraction and relaxation. So that is your myocardium. And lastly, you have your visceral pericardium. Remember, the pericardium is your outermost layer. It's made of two parts: the fibrous pericardium, which is the outside, and your visceral pericardium, which is your inside. So your fibrous pericardium has dense connective tissue that really protects the heart, whereas your visceral pericardium has mesothelial tissues, which are mesothelial layer, which are very within one cell thick layer, and it also regulates pericardial fluid, which is like a lubricant for your heart. So it helps your muscles just keep moving and have lubricant to move properly. So this was a gross anatomy of the heart that we looked at together. And again, this was the front section. So we looked at the front. This is a typical diagram that we would usually look at, but it has a lot more details and a lot more things that we just wanted to look at and understand. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you for joining me. I know this was a pretty hefty, although it was just a few slides, it was a pretty hefty lesson. I totally understand if you want to go back and just listen to me go over what these different structures are called and what their purposes are, where they're located. Definitely do that. I try to talk as slow as possible, so if you're taking notes, you could copy down what I was saying, play it in slow speed, do whatever you need, do whatever you have to so that you absorb the information properly. Okay, so before you click out of this video, please like the video and subscribe to our channel to join our student community. Also, hit the post notification bell so you're notified of our latest videos, and of course, drop a comment down below of what you thought about this video. Also, share using our socials. They're all in the description box below. We have Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, eCoreAcademy, our channel name. Those are our social medias. Use them to share with family and friends. We post daily about the videos that are going up, so you always have a constant reminder to check out our YouTube channel if you're not notified otherwise. We also have a website going up soon. This website is a gold mine. It has notes, exclusive notes from AJ and myself, presentations, simulations, and so much more than the YouTube channel can offer. So please go check that out. We'll have the link in the description box. And lastly, if you have any personal or business inquiries, use our Gmail to contact us. If you don't want to drop a comment down below, that's totally fine. We check the Gmail often, so please send us anything that you need us to look into or you just want us to see. Alright, that's all I have for you today. Look out for a new video coming soon. See you all next time. Bye.